HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
I'm one of HRN's interns, Nina Medvinskaya, with a preview of the next episode of Meat and Three, our weekly food news roundup. This week's topic, the marriage of food and danger. Sometimes, danger lurks in the food that we eat.
So instead of saying what is poisonous, I'd rather say what's not, because it's literally just the flesh and the fins.
Food poisoning doesn't just threaten our bodies, but it endangers our environment as well.
The emissions of JBS, combined with the other top 5 meat companies, exceed the annual emissions of Exxon, Shell, or BP.
For more, tune into this week's Meat and Three on Heritage Radio Network, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
This program is brought to you by Joule, sous vide by Chef Steps. Joule takes the guesswork out of cooking. Learn more at chefsteps.com/JOULE.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Josh Greene. We'll talk 2018, the year in wine. We'll taste a bunch of wines that Josh brought in. He's stacked with wines, so during the course of the show, we'll taste some, and if we have time, we'll do our weekly wine sip. I'm your host, Sam Ben Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. All right, Josh Greene is the editor and publisher of Wine and Spirits magazine, a 5-time James Beard Award winner for excellence in wine writing. Wine and Spirits magazine caters to the wine professional as well as the consumer. Josh has been at the helm of the magazine since the mid-'80s. Besides publishing and editing duties, Josh is also a critic for the magazine for the wines of the Napa Valley, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, Port, Rioja, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. I'm sure I got most of them, Josh.
Pretty much.
And also the staff, along with Josh, tastes over 15,000 wines annually, which obviously goes into the magazine. Welcome back to the Grape Nation, Josh.
Great to be here, Sam.
Well, it's our 3rd year doing our annual Year of Wine. I want to thank you for joining us and
my
coming
pleasure.
back. I can't think of anybody better to sit down and do this. So let's jump right into it. So looking back at 2018, I want you to dig deep into your body of knowledge. I want to look at regions, wineries, winemakers, grape varietals, stuff like that. I want to get your take on it.
Sure.
So I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, in 2018, let's start with wine regions. In your mind, in your writing, your feelings, what regions have emerged this year, and you feel that they will continue to thrive?
Well, the places that I've been most excited about this year, I'd have to say would be Willamette Valley in Oregon, because there's been a lot of activity going in there over the last few years, and there's a lot of new thought going into what to do with these volcanic soils in the Willamette and how to deal with both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay there. I've tasted some really exciting Chardonnays from the Willamette this year that I'd never seen before, and also spent some time there visiting with producers who are doing amazing viticultural work that's really pretty cutting edge for the New World. So that's one place I think that is really exciting right now.
Are they making more Chardonnay now than in the past?
They're making better Chardonnay than in the past. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would say more site-specific Chardonnay than in the past. And they're making wines that are really much more appropriate for their soils and climate, and rather than making wine to a style. So it was for a long time Pinot Gris that was the leader in white wines in Oregon, and it still is a very important variety. And there's a producer, King Estate, that makes terrific Pinot Gris and really puts it as their flagship. But a lot of the Chardonnay just wasn't really very interesting for a long time, and now there's one vineyard in South Salem that Lingua Franca got a hold of. Basically, it was being made by several different people that were all part of the Evening Lands diaspora. And Lingua Franca nailed a contract on it, and they are now making wine from, it's called Bunker Hill Vineyard. They're making a wine from there. Walter Scott had been making wine from there, also an Evening Land alum, and Mark Tarlov at Felipe Ramirez, working with Mark Tarlov at Chapter 24, had been making a wine from there. And it's really deeply flavorful wine from a place that doesn't look very interesting, but is making particularly astonishing Chardonnay.
Now, Lingua Franca is Larry Stone.
Larry Stone's work, yeah.
The revered sommelier,
exactly,
now winemaker.
The master sommelier, and he is, this is his wine project. I wouldn't call it a retirement project. It's really it's his first new direction in his career with leaving the sommelier world and moving into the production world.
Right. Give me some more
So in
intel.
addition to that, I would say that the Canary Islands really fascinated me. I went there based on some research we were doing for our restaurant poll, and on varieties, because variety diversity was booming in our restaurant poll this year. And I planned a trip to the Canary Islands and was completely blown away by what's going on there.
Explain. Canary Islands are west of Spain?
No, actually, Canary Islands are west of Morocco.
Morocco,
Yeah.
south.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So they're part of Spain.
Right.
They have the highest peak in Spain, El Teide, which is 12,000 feet.
Wow.
And when we do this restaurant poll every year, and that's really what we do at the very beginning of the year. It's our project in January. And what came out of it this year was how diverse the varieties were that were being sold in restaurants. Sam, you had mentioned that you were just at Frenchette and how they have this natural wine list and how diverse that list is. And that's the kind of wine list, or that's the kind of diversity in wine list that you begin to see in a lot of very high-level restaurants. So rather than our restaurant poll results being mainly Chardonnay, Cabernet, Merlot, Syrah, not even so much Syrah, but now we get things like Listan Negro, which is a Canary Islands wine. And so when people started mentioning Listan Negro in the restaurant poll, I started scratching my head and thinking, what's going on? I need to go check out what's going on in the Canary Islands. And I'd also been really interested in trying to figure out what the relationship was between Listan Prieto, a grape there in the Canary Islands, and País in Chile. And people were also mentioning País, Chilean País, in the restaurant poll for the first time.
Right.
So Canary Islands are, and I brought a wine from the Canary Islands to taste with us for us. You want to do that right now?
Yeah, pour it out
Okay.
while we're talking about it. I was, the first time I had a Canary Island wine was probably 3-4 years ago. I was at Estella, and Thomas Carter, who is the owner and a wine guy, I said, I want to try something new and different. not too crazy on the price, and he brought that out. And those are the type of places and people that are exposing it, and restaurants are exposing it to, the market. All right, so Josh just poured a red wine from the Canary Islands. Set it up for us.
So this is called La Solana. It's from Suertes del Marqués, which is a winery owned by Jonathan Garcia. And this is one of the top wineries on Tenerife, which is one of the more populated islands in the archipelago. So what's interesting about this wine, it's a single parcel wine. He's making a lot of single parcel wines. This is 2014, and it's Listan Negro is the grape variety. He has a lot of old vines that are trained in this trellis called cordon trenzado. So when you see his vineyards, they're on a very steep hillside. It's all volcanic soil. Basically, these islands came up out of a rent in the earth. There are two plates pulling apart, and these volcanoes came up, including El Teide, which is so huge. And those volcanoes blocked the heat from Africa. So the whole north side of the island gets all this cold air and cold weather from the north. So it looks like Galicia, or it looks like a Celtic sort of region rather than a desert region, just on the north side of the island. And this is on the north side of the island in a place where the volcanoes sort of crashed. And so you've got all this volcanic soil. You don't have to have rootstock because there's no phylloxera on the island. You've got these vines trained. They're wrapped. So a cordon is like a cane of the vine that's wrapped, many, many different canes, and they go, in some cases, for 75 feet.
Wow.
So it's something that you don't see anywhere else in the world. And it's sort of hard to figure out how they're going to make good wine out of it. Some of these wines that he's making from his top vineyards, his 100-year-old vineyards, are astonishing. And he worked for many years this wine he made with Roberto Santana, who is a partner in a winery called Envinate.
Right, which is very hot winery
which is
right now.
That's the hot winery.
It's four guys, I
it's
think?
4 guys.
Right.
Roberto's the one from Tenerife, actually.
Right.
And he worked with Jonathan for 8 years. And then this is 2014, 2015 he left. 2016, Jonathan brought in Luis Seabra, who had made wine at Newport for 10 years. So these two wineries, Envinate and Suertes del Marqués, are 2 wineries to look for. The other one that I think is making really amazing wine is Viñatigo.
Spell.
Viña Tigo, Viñatigo. And it's run by this guy, Juan Jesus Mendez, who's kind of the professor of grape varieties. There are 80 grape varieties on the islands. So he tracks all of them. He's been studying them. He's been, sort of trying to figure out how the blends work best together. He makes a marmajuelo that's amazing, this sort of crisp white wine that's very beautiful. He makes a wine called Ancestrales that's really beautiful. Roberto makes a wine called Margalagua from the very northeastern tip of Tenerife. Really old vines. They look like Colares. Have you ever been to Colares where the vines just sort of crawl along the ground?
Yeah.
It looks just like that.
That's interesting.
They don't have any trellising at all. And so there's a lot of really ancient viticulture here. And with all these different varieties that have come from all these different countries and settled there, you've got amazing different stuff going on.
So let's taste. So it's color-wise, it's similar to a Pinot.
Yeah.
It's translucent. It's not deep.
It's
dark.
more.
It's not bright.
It's more garnet than most Pinots
Yeah.
would be.
It's more garnety.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it looks sort of like a Grenache if you're going to compare it to color-wise.
What do you get on the nose?
I get the kind of funky aroma that I get from rustic.
Yes.
This is one of his more rustic wines. He has 2 or 3. He's got El Ceruelo and El Esquillon are his 2 top wines. And they're really elegant, really very beautiful. This is a little more rustic, a little more...
Yeah, it is rustic on the nose. It's got a medium mouthfeel. It's delicious.
It's got that sort of strawberry freshness.
It's got the strawberry freshness, but not too bright, but
Yeah.
fresh. It's a
And
terrific
very light
wine.
tannins.
Yeah, the tannins are they kind of go over you smoothly.
Yeah.
They're not heavy or anything.
So I mean, this is a casual wine. This is not I bought this wine this afternoon for like $20.
It's a great
So,
wine for
yeah.
$20. It's great to drink. It'll pair well with some foods.
It'd be great with pizza.
Pizza,
Great with
perfect.
grilled sausages.
I was going
Great-
to say
yeah.
maybe a little charcuterie meat or whatever.
Perfect
that
with
type of stuff.
charcuterie. Yep.
All right, so that's our first wine. I'm going to post everything, and I'm probably going to have to email Josh tomorrow just to get some backup on some of the wines that he mentioned, because we're talking about a lot of good stuff. All right, so we talked about Oregon. We talked about Canary Islands. Any one other place that's...
The other place that's fascinating to me, we'd sort of given up on expensive Bordeaux because it's
Okay.
just gotten so completely ridiculous, and so we'd given up on tasting it. And we organized a tasting of about 200 and some odd, 250, say, wines from Bordeaux, but they were much less expensive. They were $60 or $30 or $20 or $12.
From every known
all over
Bordeaux
the place.
region, or you
all
even...
over the place.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and Bordeaux is huge.
Right.
So you've got so much wine coming into the market, and so much of it is pretty inexpensive. And what shocked me was when I looked at the results, a lot of the wines that I was giving high scores to were from Castillon, and a lot of the wines that were from Castillon were $20, $18, not expensive at all.
Now, Castillon is a region of Bordeaux,
Castillon
like
is one of
Saint-Emilion.
yeah, exactly. Castillon is one of
Pauillac.
the Côte de Bordeaux regions. So that's
Castillon.
Yep, Castillon.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was basically the eastern reaches of the right bank, and so it's east of Saint-Emilion. It borders Saint-Emilion, and a lot of people from Saint-Emilion in around 2000, 1998, 2000 were moving there. So the cost of land sort of started to move up pretty radically around that time, and from 2002 to 2005 or so, the cost of land was about 50,000 euros for a hectare. It had gone up from about 20, from 18 to 20 to
Doubled.
50. But in Saint-Emilion, it was maybe 10 times that. So not 10 times 50, but 10 times 20.
Right.
So it went back down to 20 because the wines just weren't getting the prices that 50,000 euro would command. And so a lot of people that moved there, it still remained kind of a sleepy place, and people think of the wines as kind of rustic and not so interesting. But from my point of view, having spent a week there in September, I think that people think of the wines as rustic or less interesting because a lot of people are trying to make them as Saint-Emilion. And you've got a different climate and a different soil, even though everyone there tells you that...
Then Saint-Emilion?
Then Saint-Emilion, yeah.
And it's right next to it.
And it's right next door. And they say that it's the continuation of the limestone plateau from Saint-Emilion. And the limestone plateau is the part of Saint-Emilion that you want to be on. And it's what made Saint-Emilion rich. So when I was doing the research for this, I came across at least one geologist who said, no, it's not the same marine limestone as Saint-Emilion. It's actually lake limestone. So because you're further into the continent, you're getting a continental climate, and you're also getting more soil issues from the continent rather than from the sea.
Right.
So it's actually, you're dealing with a different terroir. And the people making wines for that terroir, like I brought one wine with me from the guy I think is really plugged in. He's from Saint-Emilion, actually, Terry Valette. His family, until I think it was 95 or so, had owned Chateau Pavie, very
Which is
famous chateau.
very famous.
It's the Pavie. There are all these
Very
other
good
Pavies
notices
around
consistently,
it.
right.
Yeah, like Pavie McCann and
This says.
yeah, all sorts of other Pavies.
Right.
But this was the Pavie, and they sold Pavie. They were making a much more elegant, old-fashioned style than what's being made now. But he went and bought 28 acres in Castillon. He farms it under biodynamics. When he first went there, it's called Clos Puy Arnaud.
Puy.
Puy
Arnot.
Arnoud.
Arnaud.
Arnaud.
Okay.
Yeah. So when he first went there, he was harvesting after everyone, and he started farming differently, and now he harvests before everyone else. So his wines are fresher, and he's a lot of them are lighter, and there are all sorts of really really interesting people making wine there now. There's Van Nieperg, who has a bunch of chateaus in Saint-Emilion. He's got
Stefan Van Nieperg, yeah.
He's got Chateau d'Aguy, which is sort of one of the grander properties
In Castillon.
in Castillon. There is the Tiempon family, which is based primarily in Côte de France, right above Côte de Castillon. So Côte de France is right to the north, but they have in Pomerol Le Pin, and they have Lif in Saint-Emilion, and they now have a property Lettres in Castillon that they purchased and are building out. So there's a lot of activity there, and it's
And a lot of major people.
major people making interesting wines.
So you know what I like about you? We're going to taste our second wine in less than 20 minutes.
Perfect.
That's a good thing. So this is the Pavi people that bought the 28 hectares in Castillon. This is the wine that they're making.
Yeah, so this is just one of the family members. So Terry is actually a jazz singer.
Oh, yeah. I could see already this is a deep, dark, brooding wine compared to the Canary Island wine.
Well, there's a lot of Merlot and Cabernet Franc.
Right.
And in
So this is the Puy Arnaud.
Clos Puy Arnaud. Yep.
Clos Puy Arnaud. All right.
And it's
vintage year?
2014.
2014, which is not the current vintage, right?
No.
It's a couple of years of bottle age here.
So when I was there, I tasted his 2017, including a wine that he made. The reason I got really turned on by this producer was he made this wine just from Cabernet Franc. And while some other people I'd tasted, like Pitre made a wine from Cabernet Franc, some other people made just single variety wines from Cabernet Franc there. But his 2017 Cabernet Franc was awesome.
I can imagine.
And it was delicate, really bright, and really fragrant wine.
So color-wise, it's that deep.
Color-wise, it's much darker,
Dark.
and it's and the color is not transparent like it was on the Canary Islands
No.
wine. Yeah.
And nose, you get into the black fruits, right? What else do you get?
Yeah, I get a little volatility on it too.
I know what volatility means, but what do you mean?
I think of it in this case a little bit like balsamic.
Okay.
Sort of a dark.
Yeah. All right, mouthfeel. It's a full-bodied mouth.
It's full-bodied, but it's pretty soft. It's
Yeah.
got a lot of acidity.
I think because of the Merlot.
Yeah. What I guess I'm an acid freak when it comes to Bordeaux, and what I really like about his wines is that they have a freshness in the finish that really lasts and drives them.
You get the acid right away on
Yeah.
the tongue. I mean, it's nice. It's not overpowering, but it's very prominent and all
Yeah.
that.
And this is not one of the great classic vintages. 14 is a good vintage.
Right.
But 15 would have been a much riper vintage.
Right.
16 would have been like one of the most sought after vintages. And that's why he made this special wine in 17, because he didn't want to compete with his 15 and 16 and try to, in a vintage that really wasn't as highly regarded. So he decided he'd make just a little bit of really top wine. And it was a really good decision.
So for Bordeaux, you're saying 16's even better than 15?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know 15 is strong, right?
Well, 15 is riper, and 16 is, I couldn't call it classical, but it is more, it's less aggressively fruity than the 15s.
Right. That's a taste thing. I mean, people will find certain vintages will deliver to them, things
Absolutely.
that they like, which is a nice thing.
And I think for American wine drinkers, 15 is a vintage that appeals a lot.
Right. It's a classic American market vintage.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
But it's
They'll
more,
be happy with it.
It's more like California wine in some cases.
Right.
Then we tasted a lot of 15s from Bordeaux that are more like California wine than not.
Right.
So.
All right, so we talked about Oregon, we talked about Canary Islands, and we talked about Bordeaux, but not the classic Bordeaux regions, Castillon, and like I said, I will list all the wines. What about grape varietals in 2018? Are there grape varietals that kind of broke out that?
I think what's happening in California and in a lot of parts of the New World actually is that the Rhone varieties. I mean, that's what we're focusing on for our next issue.
Which
what's
is
going
the
on
January
with,
issue?
February issue. Yeah.
February issue.
What's going on with Rhone varieties like Syrah and Grenache and Counoise. What's been... I was just up at an event in Montreal called Somme 360. And they brought in 22 of the most sort of high-level somms in terms of competition from around the world. And so they were sort of doing a boot camp with them and then bringing in a bunch of people from Quebec. And there were a few of us from outside of Quebec. And one of the presentations was from Perrin. I think it's Thomas Perrin who was giving this presentation about Beaucastel.
Beaucastel, right.
And he talked a lot about Counoise and how as Grenache becomes more problematic with the climate, Counoise is a grape that is producing much lighter, lower alcohol wines for them that are making the ability to blend more attractive for them. So depending on where you are in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Grenache still works really well, or it gets too hot. But there are opportunities for these other varieties. And in this market, in California, or even in places like South Africa, in Swartland, or places like McLaren Vale and Barossa in Australia, you've got people playing with Grenache and Syrah in ways that we really didn't see in the past, making much fresher wines, lighter wines, sometimes naturally sort of hands-off wines that can be fascinating. And we've seen a lot more of that, especially from California. When we were working on our annual issue where we select the 100 best wineries, one of the wineries I visited was Donkey and Goat. And they described themselves, the Brandts, Tracy Brandt was sort of describing their wine style as clean, natural wine. So they...
Why do you have to put the clean in front of the natural? I mean, why was she saying that?
I think it's actually really important, and it's one of the reasons that their wines really appeal to me. They're very hands-off, but very, very careful. So they are watching constantly and trying not to touch the wine as much as possible, but keeping track of it.
Monitoring
it, keeping track of it, keeping everything so clean in their winery that they're not going to get...
Literally.
Yeah. Keeping everything so clean they're not going to get a lot of rogue yeasts or a lot of activity in the fermentation that they don't want. And they're ending up with... They make this Pinot Gris from Greene farm in the Anderson Valley that is spectacular. And every year I taste it, it gets better. And they make a lot of Syrah and Grenache from the Sierra foothills that are awesome. So there are people like Donkey and Goat. There are people like Edmund St. John, Steve Edmonds, who's been around for a long time, making great wines from up there, from the Sierra foothills. There's a guy, Andrew Tao, who hired David Lowe from Anthill Farms, and they're doing a lot of Pinot Noir in the North Coast, but they're also making Syrah and Grenache from the foothills, and they bought some land in the foothills, and that's under the brand name The Withers. And there's also Skinner up there that's making awesome Mourvèdre. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with Rhone varieties.
So I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing a deeper dive into Rhone varietals, and I am hearing some kind of restraint or backing off from ripeness and high alcohol.
Yeah, I mean there was a big push in the 80s and 90s for Rhone varieties, and for there were the Rhone Rangers in California,
Right, the Randall Grahams, and all.
At the time there was a lot of Shiraz coming in from Australia, and
Which was big and bold.
not yet.
Not yet.
The Shiraz from Australia got big and bold in the late 90s.
Okay.
The 90s were a really interesting decade for a transition in wine style, because 91 was one of my favorite Cabernet vintages. It was cool.
Cabernet California.
California Cabernet, yep. It was cool. It was long and late, and you had very fresh wines, very light, delicate, fresh wines that aged for a long, long time.
Not typical of the following vintages.
Not typical of 94 or 97
Right.
or
Higher alcohol, ripeness.
Where from like 92 on, people started making much bigger wines. And in Australia, people were influenced by critical acclaim and started making much bigger, richer wines based on what critics were looking for. And in, not this critic, but other critics.
Sort of a Parkerization of style.
If you want to call it that.
I'm calling it, not you.
And in California, the same thing happened. And it worked probably a little better in Australia because of the particular interaction. They had old vines in Australia that they were using to make these very big, bold wines.
Right.
In California, they had young vines, young Syrah vines and young Grenache vines that they were using to make these big, bold wines, and they were making glue. They were making really heavy, gluey wines. Not everybody,
right? But they were out there.
They were out there, and there's still some out there. And so what has happened over the course of the last 15, 20 years is, people have begun to pull back on ripeness. People have begun to figure out where these varieties should be planted. And one of the reasons that the Sierra foothills is so interesting is very high elevation. So you get cool nights, and you get a diurnal shift, and it's an interesting place and interesting granitic soils. You have other pockets for Rhone varieties that are really fantastic, like the far coast of Sonoma and the far coast of Mendocino. And from those areas, you get a very different kind of spicy intensity. Especially, I brought a wine from Drew that we can open if you like.
I think we should.
It's probably my favorite Syrah from this past year.
Then I have to try it.
Okay. Well, then I'll get it. I'll get the cork pulled.
All right. So, Josh, here's what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
To give you a chance to open that wine, we're going to take a quick break.
Super.
When we come back, we're going to talk about this wine, and we'll remind people why and how we got to this. And then I want to talk to you about trends. So
Cool.
You're listening to The Grape Nation. We're talking to Josh Greene. We'll be right back.
Next year, Heritage Radio Network is turning 10. For the last decade, we've been committed to bringing listeners around the world the very best in food radio, for free. Our small staff and incredible network of hosts work hard so that listeners can tune in each week to hear the important conversations in food policy, stay on the cutting edge of cocktail culture, and hear the latest updates in food tech. But there is no HRN without the support of listeners like you. Become a member of Heritage Radio Network today and help HRN get a strong start to our second decade. Choose from exclusive member gifts and stay in the loop on discounts to upcoming events. There's no better time to show your support. Go to heritageradionetwork.org/donate and wish HRN a happy birthday.
This program is brought to you by Jewel Sous Vide. My name is Katie Mosman-Wadler. I am the Executive Director of HRN and a real-life Jewel user. When you cook with Jewel, there's zero guesswork, so steak, chicken, seafood, turkey, vegetables, and eggs all come out exactly the way you like them. The Parrot app is intuitive to use and preloaded with all the recipes you'll need, and it has a great visual doneness guide. Jewel is awesome for holiday cooking. It's easy to cook for a crowd, and it's perfectly precise, so you can focus on entertaining without worrying about checking food temps, while Jewel does all the work. You can try out new cuts fearlessly. One of the best things I ever made sous vide was a juicy, tender heritage goose with juniper berries, and it was life-changing. And pro tip, Jewel is small and packs easily, so you can sneak it along on your holiday travels to be this season's food hero everywhere you go. With Jewel, you get perfect food every time. To get yours, visit chefsteps.com/Jewel and use code HRN as in Heritage Radio Network to get $15 off for a limited time. That's chefsteps.com/JOULE, code HRN. And happy holidays from all of us at Team HRN.
All right, we're back. We're back with my guest, Josh Greene. Josh is the editor and publisher of Wine and Spirits magazine. I've invited Josh back to do our year-end show to take a look back at the Year in Wine 2018. Before we were breaking, Josh was about to crack our third bottle of wine, and it's Drew Valenti.
Valenti Vineyard, yes.
Tell me about this wine.
So Jason and Molly Drew, they had been down in the Central Coast, and Jason decided he wanted to move north and start his own company. And they bought a parcel of land, an old apple orchard, right on the coast. And they've planted some Pinot Noir vines there and some, I don't know if they have Syrah there or not. But this is from the Valenti Vineyard, which is 6 miles from the coast. And it is in Mendocino. And it is it's east facing on top of a ridge. And so it's protected a little bit from the sea. It's
It's back to the sea.
Yeah, exactly. Half of the vines there were planted from the Chaves selection of Syrah. So Chaves is a very legendary producer in the Rhone. And this is made with 50% of it is whole cluster. So
explain quickly what whole cluster is. When you make wine,
you can either destem the grapes and just use the grapes themselves to make the wine,
or throw it all in.
Or you can throw it all in, the bunches with the stems and all. And so whole cluster means that the stems and basically the whole bunches are thrown into the vat.
What do the stems add? I mean, when you do whole cluster, it's definitely a different type of wine. What are you getting from a whole cluster? Typically,
you can't say typically because
okay. I withdraw that.
No. I mean, one cannot say typically what you get because a lot of whole clusters become very trendy, and especially depends completely on how you grow your grapes and whether your stems are lignifying while your grapes are ripening.
So you have to explain what lignifying means.
When your stems are really green,
right,
they give a certain kind of tannin. When your stems are browner, and when the wood in them has lignified, they get browner, and they give a different kind of tannin.
Is that based on when you pick them?
Yeah.
If you pick them later, they could be lignified. A little earlier, they could be greener.
Yeah, but
so when you pick it and whole cluster both have to do with.
Yeah, but it's not only when you pick, it's how you farmed your grapes. Because if you farm your vines in a certain way and you have them in the right place,
right,
and you get it's a matter of coordinating the ripeness of your stems and your fruit.
Right.
So if they're coordinated and they're ripening at the same time, then when you use them in the vat, the tannins tend to open rather than adding weight to the tannins. It actually lightens the tannins.
Really?
And you see this in really well-made whole cluster wines from the Rhone. You see this in well-made Pinot Noir with whole clusters. But there are a lot of people just using whole clusters, and what they get is really aggressively peppery wine.
Right.
This wine needs about a day to be open.
Really?
To really show what when when you first taste it, it's a beautiful wine, but when you taste it a day later, it made me melt. Yeah, it's astonishing when you taste it a day later, and all those tannins have opened up.
To that point, how often are you tasting wines where you're tasting them the next day? Not always, not every wine, right?
Not
or
every
do you
wine.
try to do that? Did
Not
you
every
know
wine.
you needed to do that with this wine, or you just
I do it with any wine that I like.
see what happens the next day?
Yeah. So
Okay.
any wine that I like or that I see as a little confusing, that I don't really quite understand, that I see potential in.
Let me sleep on it.
Yeah. So we use the wretched 100-point scale, but it's
Wretched.
It's useful to us because it does allow us to make distinctions among different wineries at the end of the year, depending on how they performed with our ratings. But if I give a wine on first taste 87, but it looks really kind of interesting, I'll go back to it. Most wines I give 87 to, I give 87 to them because I'm not so interested in them.
Do they jump up the next day?
Some do,
Some.
and some crash.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it
and
goes
some,
either way.
Yeah, and some wine that I might think, wow, I could give this wine a 92 or a 93, and I taste it the next day and it's completely dead.
Right.
Not so interesting.
Right.
But this wine, I might have given it a 91, 92, 93, tasting it later in the afternoon, 94, 95, tasting the next day, 95, 96, tasting the day later. And I ended up giving it a 95. I think it should have gotten a 96 based on my note. You know,
All right, let's do a quick evaluation. So it's
This is back to that kind of transparent edge that we saw with the
transparent edge, but pretty deep and dark.
Yeah, in the middle.
In the middle for sure. The nose.
Right now, the nose I think is pretty closed. I get a lot of spice.
Spice.
And you were saying before a lot of green olive.
Yeah. All right, mouthfeel.
I think of it as green peppercorn. Like I think of if you crush green peppercorns, to me that's a marker of Far Coast Syrah.
I get tapenade, peppercorns, and olives mixed up sometimes. But when they're there, there's something going on. Mouthfeel is pretty full. Nice.
Mouthfeel is full, but for me, the texture of this wine is pure bliss.
It really is.
And I think it's so astonishing to me that I get so excited about a Syrah from California because of the texture and because of the way the spice interacts with the texture of the wine. It's energized. It's a really dynamic feel in your mouth.
It's a terrific
and
wine.
it warms my whole body without alcohol.
Right, which is typical of
Yeah.
Syrahs and all that. What's approximate retail on a wine like this?
This wine is $48, but you can't find it. He made 100 cases of
tough.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
you can probably. I mean, I don't know if you can buy this wine, this particular vintage, but if you get on his mailing list,
He's making good wines.
we
down
have.
the line.
I think that which vintages we gave his 2008, his 2011, his 2014, and his 2016 from Valenti, 95 points or higher. So if you buy a Valenti, see, I keep wanting to say Pinot. If you buy a Valenti Syrah from Drew, you're getting a damn good wine.
So two things. One, get on the mailing list.
Yeah.
Because of the consistency and the quality, and for sure it's a wine and spirits favorite. I will post that on the website. Let's talk trends for a couple of minutes. You do a restaurant.
Do I have to stop tasting this wine?
No. As a matter of fact, I need
Or
you to
drinking
pour.
it.
You told me you wanted to bring it back. I think I may drain it from you. You may have to pour me a little more. You do an annual restaurant poll, and from that you do a thing called the top of the list. I think restaurants play an important part in wine knowledge, exposing people to wine, important to the industry. Anything going on in restaurants? Any trends? I mean, different than...
For us, as I mentioned at the start, the biggest trend is esoterica.
Which
means that there are many more high-level restaurants selling wines you've never heard of before.
Now, are we talking like the fancy legacy mainstream restaurants, or just the guys?
Well, what do
in
you
the
mean by a fancy legacy
You know,
restaurant?
in New York, like a Danielle or an 11 Madison? Or
I think you'll find a much more mixed list at 11 Madison or Danielle than you would have 10 years ago.
Okay,
Absolutely.
So to that point, for sure.
Yeah. I think
And then as you go down a little, not in quality, but the type of restaurant, it even blows up more.
Well, you were mentioning before someone like Jonelle Fallner, who's
From
at
Atomics.
Atomics. If you go to a restaurant like Atomics, you're going to see all sorts of wild stuff. If you go to even the Modern, you're going to see a lot of wild stuff.
From classic to current,
Yeah.
and Viennati, you'll see all of that stuff. So the answer was a diversity of...
Diversity and the fact that that wine drinkers guests at these restaurants are happy to experiment. Because in the past, one of the things that prevented the restaurants from really diving into this was that they had resistance when they were selling these wines to consumers.
Right.
Now diners, when they go to the restaurants, they're looking for a complete experience. They're much more accustomed to going to a restaurant and having a tasting menu where people are deciding on their food, and so they're letting people decide on their wine as well.
Right.
And people are much more relaxed about it and much more interested in learning. I have a friend, Tina Vaughn at the Simone. Whenever I go there, I just say, Tina, pour me whatever you've got open. And she brings me things I've never heard of. They're absolutely, she's really careful about how they work with the food. She thinks really interesting ways about making them work with the food. And it's always like revelatory to drink wine at a place like that, because you learn not only about new wines, but also about, wow, I would never have thought about putting that wine with
Right.
that food.
Right. So you partially answered my next question, but add on to it. One of the things Wine and Spirits magazine does is a Best New Somm every year. You go out and you look at the whole country and people in the Somm community, and you have a criteria where you select a handful of Somms each year. So in the Somm world, and these are people that are a touch point, to restaurants, and the example you just gave, can enlighten you about a pairing or a wine or a region or whatever. I guess that's a trend in where Somms are going. What else? I mean, I think it's getting younger.
Well, I think Somms are getting younger because a lot of the older Somms are moving into distribution or winemaking,
right.
they're
They
burning
got
out,
cranky and
they're burning out, and their knees are going, and they're getting out of the business.
We're at that growth time.
Yeah,
Right?
and there's a lot of, I think there are a lot of young sommeliers because they learn to take. When you and I were growing up, our parents were not drinking. At least my parents weren't drinking wine, and when
Same.
when the generation that's now coming of age was growing up, their parents were drinking wine, and they were
Good
learning
point.
about wine from
Good
their
point.
parents, and they were interested in getting into the wine industry, and being a sommelier is one way in. So I mean, when I came out of school, I was a sommelier for a year, and but it was not considered a legit profession at the time.
Right.
And now it is.
Right.
So and people can actually make a good living, or start a really good career with that as their base. So
Kevin Zraly said when he was at Windows of the World, there were 7 sommeliers in New York.
Yes.
Now there's 7 at 11 Madison.
Yes, exactly.
The world has changed a bit in that sense. I think you're right about that. So yes, I think it's generational. There's a different outlook, different people coming in, and I think you and I would agree that's refreshing.
It's refreshing. They have a different perspective. I don't always agree with their perspective, but it's fascinating to learn from them.
Right.
So
it's okay to hear
and we
new
taste
perspectives.
at the magazine. We taste with a lot of young somms all the time, and some are, there is a generational difference because sommeliers, when we started tasting with them 20, 30 years ago, I would say they were much more interested in learning how to blind taste, and now they're much more interested in learning how to blind taste for their master sommelier pin. So,
Right.
So it's a different kind of learning to taste wine for the Court of Master Sommelier, or learning to taste wine for the WSET courses.
Right. The motivations
is very different from
Yeah.
the way that we taste wine at our magazine, or the way that
Right, with the
wine
new
drinkers
Psalm
taste
3
wine.
movie
Yeah.
coming out, and
Yeah.
the profession blowing up.
It's very competitive, actually.
It is very competitive. All right, I know this. I wouldn't say it's a sore subject. That's not fair to say at all.
You're bringing up natural wine.
Yes. So there's no denying there's been incredible growth in natural wine, definitely interest. Restaurants are doing natural wine lists only. There's also been a shitstorm. A couple of people have written articles, that have been viewed in different ways. I said this to you earlier. I wanted to ask you about natural wines because there's not too many other people I'm interested in hearing. and I only care about what you think. Where are we at with natural wines? Where is it going? I mean, just give me
I guess
some thoughts.
from my perspective, I don't know what a natural wine is, because if I define a natural wine, it means that the other wines are unnatural.
Right.
So I think there is a spectrum of intention from people who want to make wine without using grapes to people who want to make wine without touching grapes. So
Good point.
and there are people on every end of that. There are people on both ends of that spectrum and everywhere in between. So the way that I think about it is more how people farm and their intention in farming and the way they relate to their vineyard and the way they treat their vineyard, and how that then carries into their winemaking process, the way that they shepherd those grapes that they've farmed into a bottle eventually. And I think what people call natural wine is when the intention of the winemaker is to intervene as minimally as possible. I think I want to see people intervene when there's a problem.
Out of necessity.
Out of
for
necessity.
The right reason.
I want to see them farm their grapes in a way and treat their soil and treat their vines in a way that generates fewer problems in the winery. And there are people who do that. So I'm not necessarily a believer in no sulfur wine, because I think that I don't think we have the infrastructure to get the wine from the producer to me safely.
Without a little
Yeah.
sulfur.
Some have proven that you can make a good unsulfured wine
Right.
and still ship it.
Well, sulfur occurs naturally, but probably not enough.
Well, and it really depends on, it depends on how stable the wine is in and
Right.
of itself. I've had really great unsulfured wines, but you get a lot of bulk variation.
Right.
So I don't have this feeling like I only want to drink wine without any sulfur in it at all. I'd rather they minimize the amount of sulfur that they
Right.
had to use, but used a tiny bit at bottling or where they thought it was going to make the difference. I don't want to see people sulfuring their yeast, sulfuring and killing off their yeast from the vineyard and then inoculating.
Right.
Because I don't tend to like wines as much that are made that way as wines that are made using the microbiology from the microbiome from the vineyard to ferment.
Right.
So,
So I don't know if I'm figuring this out or not, but the practices in the farm for natural wine are sound and, good for the earth and the grape and all of that. I guess when it gets into the cellar, that's where things take a turn. And, we just discussed sulfur, inoculation, all that's where the consistency, the funkiness.
Yeah.
Is
And I
that
think
a fair observation?
well, I think there are people who use no additions but sulfur, and there are people who use no additions.
Right.
And a lot of people define natural wine as wine made with no additions.
Right.
So there's no sulfur in it. There's sulfur in it from the fermentation, but no added sulfur. I think that there's, as I say, there's a whole spectrum, and I'm happy to drink wine from someone who uses sensible farming and sensible winemaking, and who is not necessarily organic, but is hewing to the same kind of philosophical
Right.
approach.
And by the way, there's a lot of producers out there that are not certified or
Yeah.
registered, Demeter or whatever.
And there are organic farmers who might as well just be conventional farmers
Right.
for all intents and purposes.
Right.
And there's a lot of copper sulfate in organic farming. There are other things that are not necessarily positive.
Right.
So I think that reasonable and farming with the right intention is what I'm looking for.
Right, which I agree. Josh, we're going to wrap up. I want to thank you for coming in. If you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. You could follow the show on Facebook at The Grape Nation. Follow us on Instagram at sbenruby and the Grape Nation hashtag, on Twitter at Ben Ruby. Also subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Like I said earlier a few times, I'm going to post all of Josh's selections, the wines we tasted, a lot of the wines he talked about, because the reason I brought him in is for that reason, so that you can learn about some of these wines, possibly taste them. Josh, let's talk about where we could find you in the magazine. Your next issue is going to be
our February issue, February 2019.
Issue, and
yep.
Just give me a little sneak peek.
It's going to be on Mosel Riesling and Syrah Grenache.
Okay.
And it's going to be out in mid-January.
Okay.
It goes to the printer next week.
Okay.
And we're excited about some of the wines, some of the Grenache especially that we found for it. So,
which we discussed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You could follow on Instagram, Wine and Spirits Magazine at Wine and Spirits, right?
wineandspiritsmagazine.com.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And one last thing before I let Josh go, it is our end of the year fund drive. We'd like you to become a member. Become a member by donating today. Join us at heritageradionetwork.org /donate, and you'll immediately start enjoying benefits such as VIP invitations to events, meet hosts, things like that. You'll get some swag. So 2019, which is exciting, is our 10th year.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Broadcasting. So help us make it the most impactful and delicious year yet. So please, we're reaching out to you because we're funded by our listeners and our sponsors. Go to heritageradionetwork.org /donate to make a donation and help us celebrate our next year. I want to thank Josh Greene. Josh is the editor and publisher of Wine and Spirits Magazine. I've summoned him back for the third consecutive year to talk about 2018, and I think we discussed a lot of exciting wines, winemakers, and trends. Like I said, I will post everything. I want to thank our engineer, Noam, for not yelling at me today, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content and to hear about exclusive events, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at heritage_radio. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Rate the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join our community by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.